The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust as they rolled into Gold Hill, Nevada, and Josephine Sullivan pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the rough frontier town materialize through the haze of late September 1876. She had never felt more trapped in her entire 22 years of life, her future sealed in the letter her father had sent 3 months prior to a man she had never met, a wealthy cattle baron named Marcus Dalton, who needed a wife and saw her as a suitable acquisition. The coach lurched to a stop outside the dusty station, and Josephine gathered her carpetbag with trembling fingers. The other passengers began filing out, but she remained frozen, staring at the rough wooden buildings and the handful of people milling about the street. This was to be her new home, whether she wanted it or not. Her father had made that abundantly clear when he had arranged this marriage to settle his gambling debts and secure a business partnership with Dalton. "Miss, we have arrived," the driver called down, his weathered face appearing in the window. "Are you needing assistance?" Josephine forced herself to move, stepping down onto the dusty street with the driver's help. The Nevada sun beat down mercilessly, and she adjusted her traveling hat, looking around for any sign of Marcus Dalton or his representatives. According to her father's instructions, someone would be waiting to collect her. The street was busy with activity. Cowboys rode past on horseback. Miners stumbled out of saloons even at this early afternoon hour, and women in simple calico dresses hurried along the wooden sidewalks. Gold Hill was a mining town, grown prosperous from the Comstock lode, and it showed in the hastily constructed buildings and the rough characters that populated it. "Miss Sullivan." A thin man in a dark suit approached, his eyes cold and assessing. "I am Gerald Hutchins, foreman for Mr. Dalton. He sent me to collect you and bring you to his ranch." Josephine nodded, unable to find her voice. The reality of her situation pressed down on her like a physical weight. In 2 weeks, she would marry a man she had never even seen a photograph of, binding herself forever to someone her father had chosen based solely on financial advantage. Hutchins loaded her trunk onto a waiting wagon without another word, and Josephine climbed up onto the hard wooden seat. As they pulled away from the station, she took one last look at Gold Hill, wondering if she would ever find a moment of happiness in this harsh, unforgiving land. The Dalton Ranch sat about 5 miles outside of town, a sprawling operation that spoke of wealth and power. The main house was a 2-story structure, far grander than anything else Josephine had seen since arriving in Nevada. Cattle grazed across endless acres, and several outbuildings dotted the property. It should have been impressive, but to Josephine, it looked like an expensive prison. Marcus Dalton himself emerged from the house as the wagon approached. He was a tall man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered and commanding, with steel gray hair and eyes that assessed Josephine as if she were one of his cattle. He did not smile as he helped her down from the wagon. "You are younger than I expected," he said, his voice deep and rough. "Your father said you were 22, but you barely look old enough to be out of the schoolroom." "I assure you, Mr. Dalton, I am indeed 22, Josephine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. Dalton circled her slowly, and Josephine felt her skin crawl under his scrutiny. "You will do," he said finally. "I have arranged for the wedding to take place 2 weeks from Saturday. That should give you enough time to settle in and learn the household routines. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will show you to your room and explain your duties." "My duties?" Josephine asked, confused. "I thought I was to be your wife, not your employee." Dalton's expression hardened. "You are to be both. I need a wife to manage my household and provide me with heirs." "Your father was quite clear that you understood the arrangement." Before Josephine could respond, An older Chinese woman appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Chen had kind eyes that stood in stark contrast to everything else about this place, and she gestured for Josephine to follow her inside. The house was well appointed but cold, lacking any personal touches that might make it feel like a home. Mrs. Chen led Josephine upstairs to a small but clean bedroom at the end of a long hallway. "You rest now," Mrs. Chen said in accented English. "Dinner is at 6. Mr. Dalton expects punctuality." Josephine sank onto the bed as soon as the door closed, finally allowing the tears she had been holding back to fall. She had known this would be difficult, but the reality was so much worse than she had imagined. Marcus Dalton was cold and calculating, viewing her as nothing more than a transaction. There was no kindness in his eyes, no warmth in his manner. She would be nothing more than a possession, another asset to add to his considerable holdings. The next morning, Dalton sent Josephine into town with Mrs. Chen to purchase fabric for her wedding dress and other necessities. Josephine welcomed the escape, even if it was temporary. Mrs. Chen drove the wagon with practiced ease, and as they approached Gold Hill, she spoke quietly. "Mr. Dalton is not a bad man," she said, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as Josephine. "He provides good wages and he does not strike his workers, but he is not warm. His first wife, she died 5 years ago in childbirth, along with the baby. He has not been the same since." Josephine absorbed this information, feeling a small flicker of sympathy for Dalton that she quickly suppressed. Whatever grief he carried did not excuse treating her like property. The general store in Gold Hill was crowded with Saturday shoppers, and Josephine followed Mrs. Chen inside, grateful to lose herself in the mundane task of selecting fabric and thread. She was examining a bolt of ivory silk when someone bumped into her from behind, nearly knocking her over. Strong hands caught her arms, steadying her, and a deep voice said, "I am terribly sorry, miss. I was not watching where I was going." Josephine turned to find herself looking up into the warmest brown eyes she had ever seen. The man who had caught her was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore simple cowboy attire, dusty from the trail, and his hat was clutched apologetically in his hands. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern evident in his expression. "I am fine, thank you," Josephine managed, acutely aware that he was still holding her arms. He released her immediately, stepping back with an embarrassed smile. "Quincy Atwood," he said, extending his hand. "I am afraid I have a terrible habit of not paying attention when I am thinking about too many things at once." Josephine shook his hand, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through her at the contact. Josephine Sullivan, and truly, no harm was done. Quincy's smile broadened, transforming his already handsome face into something truly remarkable. "Sullivan, are you new to Gold Hill? I thought I knew everyone in town, and I certainly would have remembered meeting you." Before Josephine could answer, Mrs. Chen appeared at her elbow, her expression troubled. "Miss Sullivan, we should make our purchases and return to the ranch. Mr. Dalton does not like to be kept waiting." Something shifted in Quincy's expression at the mention of Dalton's name. "You are staying at the Dalton Ranch." "I am to be Mr. Dalton's wife," Josephine said quietly, watching as understanding and something that looked like disappointment crossed Quincy's face. "I see," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Well then, Miss Sullivan, I wish you every happiness. Good day." He replaced his hat and turned away, disappearing into the crowd of shoppers before Josephine could say anything else. She stood staring after him, confused by the hollow feeling his departure left in her chest. Mrs. Chen tugged at her sleeve. "Come, we must hurry." The rest of the shopping trip passed in a blur, and Josephine found her thoughts continually drifting back to Quincy Atwood. There had been something different about him, a gentleness and genuine warmth that she had not encountered since arriving in Nevada. The brief interaction had shown her more kindness than Marcus Dalton had managed in all their time together. That evening at dinner, Josephine sat across from Dalton at the long dining table, picking at her food while he reviewed papers related to his cattle operation. He had barely acknowledged her presence since she sat down. "Mr. Dalton," she ventured finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, "might I ask you some questions about the ranch and your business? If I am to be your wife, I should like to understand your work." Dalton looked up from his papers, his expression suggesting he found her question ridiculous. "Women do not need to concern themselves with business matters. Your responsibilities will be managing the household and, eventually, caring for our children. That is all you need to know." Josephine felt her temper flare, but she forced it down. Arguing would accomplish nothing. Instead, she asked, "Do you have many men working for you?" "About 30 regular hands," Dalton replied, returning his attention to his papers. "More during roundup season. Why do you ask?" "Merely curious," Josephine said. "I met one of the local cowboys in town today, Quincy Atwood. Do you know him?" Dalton's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "You spoke to Quincy Atwood, briefly," Josephine said, startled by his reaction. "He accidentally bumped into me in the general store." "Why? Is something wrong?" "Atwood works a small ranch about 10 miles north of here," Dalton said, his voice hard. "He has been trying to expand his operation, competing for grazing land and water rights that should rightfully be mine. I would prefer if you did not associate with him." "I see," Josephine said quietly, though privately she thought Dalton's possessiveness over land that presumably belonged to everyone was unreasonable. The following week passed slowly for Josephine. She spent her days learning the household routines under Mrs. Chen's patient guidance, and her evenings enduring silent dinners with her future husband. Dalton remained distant and cold, never asking about her thoughts or feelings, never making any effort to know her as a person. The wedding loomed ahead like an execution date, and Josephine felt increasingly desperate as it approached. On Thursday afternoon, Mrs. Chen sent Josephine to the hen house to collect eggs. Josephine welcomed any task that took her outside the oppressive atmosphere of the main house, and she gathered the eggs carefully, placing them in her basket. She was just leaving the hen house when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. A group of 5 cowboys rode into the ranch yard, and Josephine recognized Quincy Atwood among them. Her heart gave an unexpected leap at the sight of him, and she quickly scolded herself for such a reaction. She was engaged to be married, and any feelings she might have for another man were entirely inappropriate. Dalton emerged from the barn, his expression darkening as he saw the riders. "Atwood, what are you doing on my property?" Quincy dismounted, his manner calm but firm. "We need to talk about the north pasture, Dalton. Your men have been cutting my fence lines and driving my cattle off the grazing land near Silver Creek. That land is not part of your holdings, and you have no right to it." "I have every right," Dalton said coldly. "I have been grazing cattle on that land for 15 years. If you think you can come in and take what is mine just because you filed some papers in town, you are mistaken." "The land belongs to whoever holds the deed," Quincy replied, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "I bought that section legally, and I have the paperwork to prove it. I'm not looking for trouble, Dalton, but I will not let you run roughshod over me either." Josephine watched the confrontation with growing alarm. Dalton's hands had curled into fists, and his face was flushed with anger. The other cowboys with Quincy sat tensed in their saddles, ready to back their boss if things turned violent. Before Dalton could respond, Josephine stepped forward, her basket of eggs clutched in her hands. "Mr. Dalton, perhaps this discussion would be better conducted in a more civil manner. These men have ridden a long way, and common courtesy suggests we should at least offer them water for themselves and their horses." Every eye turned to her, and Josephine felt her face flush under the scrutiny. Dalton looked furious that she had dared to interrupt, but Quincy's expression softened with gratitude. "That is very kind of you, Miss Sullivan," Quincy said, "but we would not wish to impose." "It is no imposition," Josephine insisted, looking directly at Dalton. "Is it, Mr. Dalton?" For a long moment, Dalton stared at her, and Josephine saw a battle playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he jerked his head toward the water trough. "Water your horses and be on your way. And Atwood, stay off my land and away from what is mine." The emphasis on the last word was clearly meant to include Josephine, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. Quincy's jaw tightened, but he simply nodded and led his horse to the trough. Josephine hurried back to the house, but she could not resist glancing back as she reached the porch. Quincy was watching her, and their eyes met for a brief moment before she forced herself to turn away and go inside. That evening, Dalton was even more silent than usual at dinner, and the anger radiating from him made Josephine's stomach churn. She barely touched her food, and as soon as she could politely excuse herself, she retreated to her room. She sat by the window, looking out at the darkening landscape, and wondered what her life would be like once she became Mr. Dalton's wife. The prospect filled her with dread. There was no affection between them, no warmth, no connection beyond the legal contract her father had negotiated. She would spend the rest of her life in this cold house with this cold man, bearing his children and managing his household, never knowing kindness or true companionship. Unbidden, Quincy Atwood's face appeared in her mind. She barely knew him, had spoken to him only twice, but something about him called to her in a way she did not fully understand. The warmth in his eyes, the genuine concern he had shown when he nearly knocked her over, the calm strength he had displayed when confronting Dalton, all spoke of a good man, a kind man, someone entirely different from the man she was pledged to marry. Josephine pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. Such thoughts were pointless and dangerous. Her fate was sealed. In a little over a week, she would become Mrs. Marcus Dalton, and any dreams of something different would have to be buried forever. The next day was Friday, and Dalton announced at breakfast that he had business in Virginia City that would keep him away until late Sunday evening. Josephine tried not to show her relief at the prospect of 2 days without his oppressive presence. After he departed, the house seemed to breathe easier. Even Mrs. Chen hummed as she went about her work, and Josephine found herself relaxing for the first time since her arrival. On Saturday morning, Josephine asked Mrs. Chen if she might ride into town to post a letter to her mother. Mrs. Chen agreed to drive her, and they set off in the wagon under a brilliant blue Nevada sky. The town was busy, as it always seemed to be on Saturdays. Josephine posted her letter at the small post office and then wandered down the main street, enjoying the simple pleasure of being away from the ranch. She paused outside the dress shop, admiring a ready-made green traveling suit displayed in the window. "It would look beautiful on you." Josephine turned to find Quincy standing behind her, his hat in his hands and that warm smile on his face. Her heart began to race, and she felt suddenly breathless. "Mr. Atwood," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What a pleasant surprise." "Quincy, please," he said. "Mr. Atwood makes me feel like I should be lecturing schoolchildren." He gestured to the dress in the window. "Are you planning to purchase it?" "No," Josephine said. "I was simply admiring it. I am afraid my wardrobe funds are quite limited." Quincy's expression turned serious. "Miss Sullivan, may I speak plainly with you?" "Please do," Josephine said, though her pulse quickened with nervousness. "I know it is not my place to say this, and I risk offending you, but I cannot remain silent," Quincy said, his brown eyes intense. "Are you truly happy with your engagement to Marcus Dalton? Because in the 2 times I have seen you, you have looked like a bird trapped in a cage." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes at his perceptiveness. "My happiness is not a consideration," she said quietly. "My father arranged this marriage to settle his debts. I have no choice in the matter." "There is always a choice," Quincy said gently. "It may not be an easy one, but it exists nonetheless." "And what would you have me do?" Josephine asked, her voice breaking slightly. "I have no money, no prospects, nowhere else to go. My father made it clear that if I refuse this marriage, he will disown me entirely. I would be destitute." Quincy stepped closer, and Josephine could see the war of emotions playing across his face. "I know I have no right to make this offer, and you barely know me, so you have every reason to refuse. But if you need a way out, if you truly cannot bear to marry Dalton, I would help you. I could arrange passage for you to San Francisco or Sacramento, somewhere you could start fresh. I have some money saved, and I would ask nothing in return except the knowledge that you are safe and free to choose your own path." Josephine stared at him, stunned by the offer. "Why would you do that for me? You do not know me at all." "I know enough," Quincy said simply. "I know that you deserve better than a loveless marriage to a man who treats you like property. I know that you have kindness and courage, which you showed when you intervened during our confrontation. And I know that sometimes one small act of help can change everything." He paused, then added more quietly, "And if I am being completely honest, I know that from the moment I bumped into you in the general store, I have not been able to stop thinking about you." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. "Quincy, you do not need to say anything now," he interrupted gently. "Just know that the offer stands. If you change your mind, if you decide you cannot go through with the wedding, come to me. My ranch is 10 miles north of Dalton's, just past Silver Creek. Anyone in town can give you directions. I promise I will help you no matter what." Before Josephine could respond, Mrs. Chen appeared around the corner, calling her name. Quincy stepped back quickly, replacing his hat. "Think about what I said," he told her, then tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Josephine standing on the sidewalk with her heart pounding and her mind reeling. On the wagon ride back to the ranch, Josephine could barely focus on Mrs. Chen's chatter about the rising price of flour and sugar. Quincy's offer played over and over in her mind, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. He had said he thought about her constantly, and she could no longer deny that she felt the same way about him. In their brief encounters, he had shown her more genuine care and concern than Dalton had managed in days. But accepting his help would mean defying her father, abandoning the security of the marriage arrangement, and quite possibly ruining her reputation forever. It would be a scandal that could follow her wherever she went. And yet, the alternative was binding herself for life to a man she could never love, never respect, never even like. That night, alone in her room, Josephine made a decision. She could not go through with the wedding. She could not sentence herself to a lifetime of unhappiness just to satisfy her father's debts and pride. But she also could not simply accept Quincy's charity and disappear to some distant city. If she was going to choose freedom, she needed to do it on her own terms. Sunday evening came too quickly, and with it, Marcus Dalton's return. He was in an even fouler mood than usual, his business in Virginia City apparently having gone poorly. At dinner, he announced that the wedding would take place the following Saturday instead of the original date, a full week earlier than planned. "But that is only 6 days away," Josephine protested. "The dress is not finished, and the dress is finished enough," Dalton interrupted. "I see no reason to delay any longer. The sooner we are married, the sooner you can begin fulfilling your duties as my wife." The way he said duties made Josephine's skin crawl. That night, she lay awake for hours, her mind made up. She would not marry Marcus Dalton. She would go to Quincy, accept his help, and find a way to make a new life for herself, wherever be that might be. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, and Josephine waited until Dalton left to inspect his herds before approaching Mrs. Chen in the kitchen. "Mrs. Chen," she said quietly, "I need to borrow a horse, just for a few hours. I promise I will return it safely." Mrs. Chen studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will tell Mr. Dalton you went for a ride to clear your head before the wedding. But Miss Sullivan, whatever you are planning, be careful. Mr. Dalton is not a man who takes well to being crossed." Josephine hugged the older woman impulsively. "Thank you for your kindness. You have been the only bright spot in this place." She changed into her riding habit and made her way to the stable, where one of the ranch hands helped her saddle a gentle mare. Her hands shook as she mounted, but her resolve was firm. She pointed the horse north and set off at a steady pace. The ride to Quincy's ranch took nearly 2 hours, and by the time Josephine saw the modest farmhouse and barns in the distance, her nerves were stretched taut. What if Quincy had only made the offer out of politeness? What if he had not really meant it? What if he turned her away? But as she rode into the yard, Quincy emerged from the barn, and the expression on his face when he saw her erased all her doubts. He looked like a man who had just witnessed a miracle. "Josephine," he said, striding toward her and helping her down from the horse. "What happened? Are you all right?" "Dalton moved the wedding up to Saturday," Josephine said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I cannot do it, Quincy. I cannot marry him. If your offer still stands, if you still meant what you said, then I need your help." Quincy's hands were still on her waist, steadying her, and his eyes searched her face. "I meant every word. But Josephine, are you sure? Once you do this, there will be no going back. Dalton will not forgive you, and neither will your father." "I am sure," Josephine said firmly. "I would rather face an uncertain future alone than spend my life trapped in a loveless marriage to a man who sees me as nothing more than property." "You will not be alone," Quincy said quietly. "I told you I would help you, and I will. But Josephine, I need to be honest with you about something. When I offered to send you to San Francisco or Sacramento, I meant it. But I would much prefer a different solution, if you would be willing to consider it." "What solution?" Josephine asked, though her heart was already racing because she thought she knew what he was about to say. "Marry me instead," Quincy said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it seems sudden, and I know you barely know me, but these past days thinking about you belonging to Dalton have been torture. I cannot offer you the wealth he can, or the grand house, but I can offer you respect and partnership and the freedom to be yourself. And I can promise you that I will spend every day trying to make you happy." Josephine felt tears streaming down her face. "You would do that? You would marry me, even though it would make an enemy of Dalton?" "I would do anything for you," Quincy said simply. "I know it is fast, and I know you might not feel the same way I do, but I am asking you to give me a chance. Give us a chance. We can get married today, right now, before Dalton even knows you are gone. And if you decide later that it was a mistake, I will help you get an annulment. But at least you will have made your own choice." Josephine looked up into his warm brown eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope. She thought about the way her heart leaped every time she saw him, the way his kindness had given her courage, The way he looked at her like she was precious and valuable rather than just a transaction. It was sudden and reckless and possibly foolish, but for the first time in her life, she was choosing her own path. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy that lit up Quincy's face was worth every ounce of fear and uncertainty. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Josephine felt something inside her chest unfurl and bloom. This was what it felt like to be cherished. This was what she had been missing. "We should go quickly," Quincy said, reluctantly releasing her. "There is a minister in Gold Hill who will marry us. Do you have any belongings you need to retrieve from Dalton's ranch?" "Everything I own is there," Josephine admitted. "But I do not want to go back. I will make do with what I have on." "We will buy you whatever you need," Quincy promised. "But you are right not to go back. Once Dalton realizes you are gone, he will be furious." They rode together into Gold Hill, Josephine on her borrowed mare and Quincy on his sturdy gelding. The town was busy with midday activity, and several people stared curiously as the pair rode past. Josephine knew that within hours, everyone in Gold Hill would know that Marcus Dalton's bride-to-be had run off with Quincy Atwood. The scandal would be enormous. But when she looked at Quincy riding beside her, his expression determined and protective, she found she did not care. The minister, a kind-faced man named Reverend Thomas, was surprised by their hasty request, but agreed to perform the ceremony. He called his wife to serve as a witness, along with one of Quincy's ranch hands who happened to be in town. Standing in the simple church, wearing her dusty riding habit and holding a borrowed handkerchief in place of a bouquet, Josephine felt more certain than she ever had in the grand plans for her wedding to Dalton. When Quincy slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Josephine felt tears of happiness rather than dread. Quincy kissed her gently, his lips warm and soft against hers, and Josephine felt her entire world shift and settle into something that felt right. They were just leaving the church when a commotion erupted in the street. Marcus Dalton had arrived in town, and he was clearly looking for someone. Josephine's stomach clenched with fear as she saw him storming down the street, his face purple with rage. "Atwood," he roared. "Where is she? I know you have her. One of my men saw her riding north this morning." Quincy stepped in front of Josephine protectively, his stance calm but ready. "Miss Sullivan is no longer your concern, Dalton." "The hell she is not," Dalton snarled, spotting Josephine behind Quincy. "Josephine, get out here right now. We are going home." "I am not going anywhere with you," Josephine said, her voice shaking but determined. "I am not your property, Mr. Dalton, and I never will be." Dalton's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Your father and I have a contract. You belong to me." "Actually, she belongs to herself," Quincy interjected. "And as of 20 minutes ago, she is my wife, not your fiancée." "So you have no claim on her whatsoever." The shock on Dalton's face would have been comical under other circumstances. "Your wife. You married her. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "I married a woman I care about, who deserves to be treated with respect and kindness," Quincy said evenly. "Something you clearly never understood." Dalton's hand moved toward the gun at his hip, and Josephine gasped in fear. But Quincy did not flinch, and several men in the street, including the sheriff, moved closer, their presence a clear warning. "I would not do that if I were you," the sheriff said calmly. "Whatever grievance you have, Dalton, it does not justify violence in the middle of town." Dalton's hand fell away from his gun, but the fury in his eyes was terrifying. "You will regret this, Atwood. Both of you will regret this." "I will make sure of it." "Are you threatening my wife?" Quincy asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I am promising you that there are consequences for crossing me," Dalton said. You wanted that land near Silver Creek. You will never graze a single cow on it. You will be run out of this territory before the year is out, and your little bride will learn what it means to live in poverty. I would rather live in poverty with a good man than in luxury with you, Josephine said, finding her courage. You may intimidate others, Mr. Dalton, but you do not frighten me anymore. Dalton stared at her for a long moment, then turned on his heel and stalked away, shoving past the gathered crowd. Josephine sagged against Quincy, the adrenaline draining from her body and leaving her shaking. "It is over," Quincy murmured, wrapping his arms around her. "You are safe now, I promise." But as they rode back to Quincy's ranch later that afternoon, Josephine could not shake the feeling that Dalton's threats were not empty ones. He was a powerful man with extensive resources and connections. He could make their lives very difficult if he chose to. Quincy's ranch was modest compared to Dalton's sprawling operation, but it was clean and well-maintained, with a small farmhouse that felt warm and welcoming rather than cold and imposing. Quincy had 3 regular hands who lived in the bunkhouse, and they greeted Josephine with respectful courtesy when Quincy introduced her as his wife. That evening, Quincy showed Josephine around her new home. The farmhouse had 3 rooms downstairs, a kitchen, a sitting room, and Quincy's office. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms, one of which Quincy had been using for storage. "I know it is not much," Quincy said apologetically, "especially compared to what you would have had with Dalton, but it is honest work and it is ours." "It is perfect," Josephine said truthfully, looking around the cozy kitchen with its iron stove and simple wooden table. "This feels like a home, not a museum." Quincy smiled, clearly relieved. "I am glad you think so. Josephine, I want you to know that I meant what I said. I am not expecting you to feel the same way I do right away. We can take this as slowly as you need. I can sleep in the spare room until you are comfortable with me." Josephine turned to face him, this man who had offered her freedom and kindness without asking for anything in return. "Quincy, I may not have known you long, but I know enough. I know that you are good and kind and brave. I know that you make me feel safe and valued. And I know that I want to be your wife in every sense of the word, not just in name." The hope and desire that flared in Quincy's eyes made her breath catch. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and cupped her face in his hands, kissing her with a passion that made her knees weak. Josephine wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her gratitude and growing affection into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "I will do everything in my power to make you happy, Josephine. I swear it." That night, as Josephine lay in Quincy's arms in the bedroom they now shared, she felt a peace she had never known. The future was uncertain, and Dalton's threat still loomed over them, but for the first time in her life, she had chosen her own path, and she had chosen well. The next few weeks were simultaneously the happiest and most challenging of Josephine's life. True to his threats, Marcus Dalton used his influence to make things difficult for Quincy. Several merchants in Gold Hill suddenly refused to do business with them, clearly pressured by Dalton. The banker who had been considering extending Quincy a loan to expand his operation abruptly withdrew the offer. But Quincy faced each setback with determination and creativity. When the general store refused to sell them supplies, he found a merchant in Virginia City willing to do business. When the banker refused the loan, Quincy adjusted his expansion plans and focused on improving what they already had. Josephine threw herself into life on the ranch with enthusiasm she had not known she possessed. She learned to cook on the iron stove, to tend the vegetable garden, to care for the chickens and collect eggs. She helped Quincy with the account books, discovering she had a talent for numbers and organization that proved invaluable. More importantly, she fell deeper in love with her husband every day. Quincy was patient and kind, teaching her about ranch life without ever making her feel inadequate. He listened to her opinions and valued her input, treating her as a true partner rather than a subordinate. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, he showed her a passion and tenderness that made her understand what marriage could truly be. One evening in late October, about 3 weeks after their wedding, Josephine and Quincy were finishing dinner when they heard horses approaching the house. Quincy tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle he kept near the door, but he relaxed when he recognized the visitors. 3 men dismounted in the yard: the sheriff, Reverend Thomas, and a tall, distinguished-looking man Josephine did not recognize. Quincy invited them in, and Josephine quickly put coffee on to boil. "Mr. Atwood, Mrs. Atwood," the sheriff began, "this is Judge Harrison from Virginia City. He has some information that concerns you both." The judge removed his hat and accepted the coffee Josephine offered. "Mr. Atwood, I understand you have been having some difficulties with Marcus Dalton." "You could say that," Quincy replied carefully. "He has been using his influence to interfere with my business relationships, but I assume you did not ride all the way out here just to discuss that." "No," Judge Harrison agreed. "I came because I received some disturbing information about Mr. Dalton's dealings, and I felt you had a right to know. It seems that the contract he had with Miss Sullivan's father was not entirely legal." Josephine leaned forward, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" "Your father did owe Dalton money," the judge explained. "Quite a lot of it from what I understand, but the agreement to settle that debt through your marriage was made under duress. Dalton threatened your father with financial ruin and possibly physical harm if he did not agree to the arrangement. That makes the contract voidable." "But what does that matter now?" Josephine asked. "I am already married to Quincy." "It matters because Dalton has been threatening legal action," the sheriff interjected. "He has been telling people he plans to sue your father for breach of contract and possibly sue Mr. Atwood for alienation of affections. But if the original contract was not valid, he has no legal standing." Relief flooded through Josephine, and she reached for Quincy's hand. He squeezed her fingers reassuringly. "There is more," Judge Harrison continued. "In investigating Dalton's business practices, we have uncovered some irregularities in his land claims. It appears he has been illegally filing claims on public land and using intimidation to drive out smaller ranchers who have legitimate rights to graze their herds. The land near Silver Creek that he has been disputing with you, Mr. Atwood, is one such example." Quincy sat up straighter. "Are you saying I have legal right to that land?" "More than that," the judge said. "I am saying that Dalton's claim to several thousand acres is being investigated. If the allegations are proven, which seems likely, he could face substantial fines and possibly criminal charges. His influence in this territory is about to diminish significantly." After the visitors left, Josephine and Quincy sat together in stunned silence. Finally, Quincy began to laugh, the sound full of relief and disbelief. "We are free," he said, pulling Josephine into his arms. "Truly free. Dalton cannot touch us." Josephine buried her face in his shoulder, feeling tears of relief and joy streaming down her cheeks. "I can hardly believe it. All this time, I thought my father had the legal right to promise me to Dalton. I thought I was bound by that agreement." "Even if you had been," Quincy said softly, "you still would have had the right to choose differently, but I am glad you do not have to carry that guilt anymore." The investigation into Marcus Dalton's business practices proceeded swiftly once it began. Within 2 months, he was facing multiple lawsuits and criminal charges. His empire began to crumble as the truth about his methods came to light. Many of the merchants who had refused to do business with Quincy, either out of fear or loyalty to Dalton, quietly resumed their normal trading relationships. Christmas of 1876 was the happiest of Josephine's life. She and Quincy spent the day alone together, enjoying a modest feast and exchanging simple gifts. Quincy gave her a beautiful wool shawl he had purchased in Virginia City, and Josephine gave him a new hat she had saved for weeks to afford. But the best gift was simply being together, building a life based on mutual respect and growing love. In January, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and terror. Her own mother had lost 2 babies before Josephine was born, and childbirth was dangerous even under the best circumstances. But Quincy's excitement and support helped ease her fears. "We are in this together," he assured her, holding her close. "Whatever happens, we will face it together." As winter gave way to spring, Josephine's body changed and grew. The sickness of early pregnancy passed, and she found herself with renewed energy. She continued to help Quincy with the ranch work as much as she was able, and together they planned for the future. In March, Marcus Dalton left Nevada Territory. His legal troubles had become overwhelming, and he sold what remained of his holdings to pay his debts and legal fees. Josephine felt a strange mix of relief and pity when she heard the news. Dalton had brought his downfall upon himself through his greed and cruelty, but she could not help but feel some sadness for any human being who had lost everything. With Dalton gone, life in Gold Hill returned to normal. Quincy's ranch continued to grow and prosper. He was able to secure the land near Silver Creek legally, giving them access to better grazing and a reliable water source. They hired 2 additional hands to help with the expanded operation, and Quincy began building a larger barn to accommodate their growing herd. In late August, on a sweltering afternoon that had Josephine short-tempered and uncomfortable, her labor began. Quincy rode to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Brennan, who had delivered half the babies in Gold Hill. The next 12 hours were the longest and most painful of Josephine's life, but Quincy stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. Just before dawn on August 27, 1877, Josephine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after Quincy's father, and when Quincy held his son for the first time, the look of wonder and love on his face made all the pain worthwhile. "He is perfect," Quincy breathed, carefully cradling the tiny bundle. "Josephine, you are amazing. Look what we made." Exhausted but happy, Josephine watched her husband bond with their newborn son and felt her heart overflow with love for both of them. This was what she had been meant for, not a cold marriage of convenience, but this warm, chaotic, beautiful life filled with love and purpose. The first year of Samuel's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious moments. Josephine discovered she loved being a mother, even when it was exhausting and frustrating. Quincy was a devoted father, taking Samuel with him around the ranch whenever possible, and singing him to sleep at night with off-key lullabies that never failed to make Josephine smile. In the spring of 1878, Josephine received a letter from her mother. It was the first communication she had received from her family since her impulsive marriage to Quincy. With trembling hands, she opened it and read, "My dearest Josephine, I hope this letter finds you well and happy. Your father and I have learned of your marriage and the birth of your son. Your father is still angry and hurt that you defied him, but I am writing to tell you that I understand why you made the choice you did. I am sorry we placed you in such a terrible position, and I am grateful you found the courage to choose your own happiness. I have also learned the truth about Marcus Dalton and his treatment of your father. I am ashamed that we allowed ourselves to be manipulated by such a man and nearly forced you into a marriage that would have made you miserable. If you are willing, I would very much like to meet my grandson and see you again. Your father may come around in time, but I cannot wait any longer to reconnect with my daughter. With all my love, Mother Josephine wept as she read the letter, feeling a weight she had not known she was carrying lift from her shoulders. That evening, she showed the letter to Quincy, who immediately agreed that they should invite her mother to visit. Josephine's mother arrived in May, taking the long journey from Missouri to Nevada with surprising determination for a woman in her 50s. The reunion was tearful and emotional, with apologies and forgiveness flowing freely. Josephine's mother was enchanted with Samuel and charmed by Quincy, who went out of his way to make her feel welcome. During the visit, Josephine's mother shared news from home. Josephine's father had lost much of his business due to poor decisions and drinking, and he was now living in reduced circumstances. Josephine felt some pity for him, but no regret for her choices. Her life with Quincy was far richer than anything her father could have arranged. After her mother's visit, Josephine felt a sense of closure about her past. She had made peace with her family, or at least with the family members who mattered. Her future stretched ahead bright with possibility. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and happiness. Quincy's ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in the area. They expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. In 1880, Josephine gave birth to a daughter, Emma, whose arrival filled their home with even more love and laughter. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing signs of the same kindness and determination that made Quincy such a good man. Emma was quieter and more thoughtful, often content to sit with Josephine and help with simple tasks or look at picture books. In 1883, their family was completed with the birth of another son, Thomas. Quincy joked that they now had enough children to form their own cattle crew, and Josephine laughed at the image of their little ones trying to herd cows. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, moments of worry and struggle. But through it all, Josephine and Quincy faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge overcome. On their 10th wedding anniversary in the fall of 1886, Quincy surprised Josephine with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and spent a week in the city, staying in a nice hotel and enjoying the luxuries of urban life. They attended the theater, dined in fine restaurants, and walked along the waterfront holding hands like young sweethearts. On their last evening in San Francisco, as they watched the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, Quincy pulled Josephine close and said, "You ever regret it? Giving up the life you could have had with Dalton?" Josephine turned to look at him in surprise. "How can you even ask that? I have never regretted it, not for a single moment. That life would not have been mine. It would have been a prison. What we have is real and true, built on love and respect. I would not trade it for anything in the world." Quincy smiled and kissed her softly. "Good, because I fall more in love with you every day, and I cannot imagine my life without you." They returned to Gold Hill and their children refreshed and more connected than ever. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Samuel, at 16, was already a skilled rancher, working alongside his father with pride and competence. Emma, at 13, had developed a passion for teaching and often helped the younger children in town with their lessons. Thomas, at 10, showed a gift for working with horses that amazed everyone. In the spring of 1893, Samuel announced that he was courting a girl from town, the daughter of the feed store owner. Josephine felt the bittersweet pang of watching her firstborn grow up, but she was pleased to see him choosing his own path with confidence and maturity. That summer, Josephine received word that her father had passed away. She had not seen him since before her marriage, as he had never forgiven her defiance. Still, she mourned the relationship they might have had if he had been a different man. Quincy held her as she cried, offering comfort without judgment. Her mother came for another visit later that year, her hair now white but her spirit still strong. She spent 3 months with them, enjoying her grandchildren and the peaceful rhythm of ranch life. Before she left, she told Josephine, "I am so proud of you, my dear. You had the courage I never did to choose love over security. Look at the beautiful life you have built." As Josephine entered her 40s, she sometimes reflected on how different her life had turned out from what had been planned. If she had married Marcus Dalton as her father intended, she would likely have wealth and social standing. But she would have been miserable, trapped in a loveless marriage with a cruel man. Instead, she had Quincy, whose kindness had given her the courage to choose love. She had 3 wonderful children, a home filled with warmth and laughter, and a partnership that had only deepened with time. In 1898, Samuel married his sweetheart in a beautiful ceremony at the church in Gold Hill. The wedding was simple but joyful, and watching her son pledge his life to the woman he loved, Josephine felt tears of happiness streaming down her face. Quincy squeezed her hand, and when she looked at him, she saw the same emotions reflected in his eyes. A year later, Samuel and his wife presented them with their first grandchild, a baby girl named Josephine after her grandmother. Holding her namesake for the first time, Josephine felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. Emma eventually became a schoolteacher, just as she had always dreamed, opening a small school in Gold Hill that served the children of miners and ranchers alike. She never married, finding fulfillment in her work and her family. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch operations as Quincy grew older, showing the same steady leadership and fairness that had made his father so respected. On a warm evening in the summer of 1902, Josephine and Quincy sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the Nevada hills. They were both in their late 60s now, their hair gray and their bodies slower than they once had been. But the love between them burned as brightly as ever. "You remember the day we met?" Quincy asked, his arm around Josephine's shoulders. "I was so clumsy, nearly knocking you over in the general store." "I remember," Josephine said, smiling at the memory. "I thought you had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. I did not know then that those eyes belonged to the man who would save me and give me the most wonderful life imaginable." "You saved yourself," Quincy said firmly. "I just offered you a choice. You were the one brave enough to take it." Josephine leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "We saved each other, and we built something beautiful together." Around them, the ranch hummed with life. In the distance, they could hear Thomas calling to the cattle, his voice strong and sure. Through the open window behind them came the sound of Emma reading to her niece, their granddaughter Josephine. Samuel and his family would be arriving tomorrow for Sunday dinner, as they did every week without fail. This was Josephine's legacy, not wealth or social position, but love multiplied across generations. It had all started with one cowboy's kindness and one woman's courage to choose her own path. From that single brave choice had grown a family, a home, a life rich with meaning and connection. "I love you," Josephine whispered to Quincy. "Every single day I love you more." "And I love you," Quincy replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. My brave, beautiful Josephine, you are the best decision I ever made. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Josephine felt profound gratitude wash over her. She had been promised to another man, bound by duty and obligation to a future that would have broken her spirit. But one cowboy's kindness had shown her there was another way, had given her the courage to reach for love instead of settling for security. And oh, what a magnificent life that courage had brought her! What joy, what purpose, what deep and abiding love! She had 3 strong, good children who were making their own ways in the world with the values she and Quincy had taught them. She had grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward. And she had Quincy, her partner, her love, her home. The years continued to unfold gently. Quincy and Josephine grew older together, their steps slower but their bond unbreakable. They watched their grandchildren grow, witnessed Samuel expand the ranch even further, celebrated Emma's success as more families sent their children to her school, and took pride in Thomas's skill with horses that brought buyers from as far as California. In 1905, on a crisp autumn morning, Quincy passed away peacefully in his sleep with Josephine holding his hand. The grief was profound, a physical ache that Josephine thought might break her. But even in her sorrow, she was grateful. Grateful for 34 years of marriage filled with love and laughter. Grateful for the family they had built together. Grateful for every moment they had shared. Josephine lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She spent her final years sharing stories of her life with Quincy, making sure the younger generations understood the courage and kindness that had built the foundation of their family. She told them about the day she was meant to marry Marcus Dalton, about the choice she had made to follow her heart instead, about the wonderful life that choice had given her. When Josephine Sullivan Atwood passed away in the spring of 1913 at the age of 79, she was laid to rest beside Quincy in the small cemetery in Gold Hill. Their children and grandchildren gathered to remember her, sharing memories and tears. They would learn that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust your heart, even when the whole world tells you to do otherwise. And they would understand that real love, the kind worth fighting for, is built not on wealth or obligation, but on kindness, respect, and the daily choice to honor and cherish one another. The ranch still stood, passed down through the generations, a testament to what Quincy and Josephine had built together. And in that way, their love story never really ended. It lived on in the land they had worked, in the values they had passed down, in the family that carried their blood and their legacy forward into the future. 2 people who had taken a chance on each other, who had chosen love over security, whose kindness and courage had created something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. That was the real magic of their story, not that it had a fairy tale ending, but that it had a real one. Full of work and struggle, joy and sorrow, ordinary moments and extraordinary love. A cowboy and the woman he helped save, who saved him right back, building a life together one day at a time until those days added up to a beautiful forever.